President Trump making a second attempt here to limit birthright citizenship. This was after, of course, we saw that the Supreme Court struck down his initial attempt at this back in June. This was over, obviously, the 14th Amendment, which, according to birthright citizenship, guarantees the right that someone who is born in this country, regardless of their parent status, is an American citizen. Well, President Trump signed 2 executive orders yesterday. The first creates a list of those who would not be granted automatic citizenship. The second targets so-called birth tourism, tightening visa rules for visitors who come to the U.S. to give birth. President Trump says he believes this version is constitutional. Civil rights groups are promising to challenge the order in federal court. It appears that we are very much so speeding towards what will be yet another showdown here in front of maybe the Supreme Court or maybe not. But regardless, it sounds like we're headed towards a courtroom.
Yeah, this seems like this is round 2. We've often seen President Trump, in the wake of a Supreme Court ruling on whatever the issue may be, trying to seek other legal means to get further the president's agenda. Tariffs is a great example of that. We saw his universal reciprocal tariffs be shot down, and we are currently in the midst of another legal battle over his more recent batch of tariffs that he has implemented. He put some in on a temporary basis. Those expired, so now he's using another trade law to try to impose essentially what it has been the trade agenda that he has promised since he has been elected into office. And the court battles continue, and we're going to see it here. So I think it's important to, again, just kind of go over what we have seen so far with President Trump and the idea of birthright citizenship. This was something that he targeted on his first day in office. He signed an executive order ending it. It was blocked by the lower courts. It never took effect. This is one of the first things he signed. This was in the Oval Office. This wasn't when they went to the Capital One Arena after the inauguration and signed the executive orders in the stadium. I believe this was something that he did in the Oval Office, but it was nonetheless, this was the same day. But again, in June, 2 months ago, the Supreme Court struck that down on a 6-3 ruling on the underlying constitutional question. Only 5 justices said birthright citizenship is something that is enshrined in the Constitution. We talk about the 14th Amendment. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Justice Brett Kavanaugh, he rejected the order, but he didn't base it off of constitutional grounds. He said that that was a federal law, regardless of the thought process of the interpretation of the Constitution and federal law that led to the decision. It was not a decision that was in President Trump's favor.
Yeah.
President Trump blasted it when the decision was made, and during yesterday's announcement, he blasted it once more.
I thought we were going to win it at the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, we had a bad decision, very unfair decision. Our country suffers because of it, and we're ending it a different way.
Yeah, so as you hear there, this sounds essentially like what they've done, and this is what they do, is they take a look at what it is that the decision that the justices handed down and those arguments, and it sounds like what they did is crafted something here that may actually survive any type of legal scrutiny. We'll have to see. It's obviously a judge will have to make that call if it gets to the Supreme Court, etc. But we're already hearing legal analysis from those with CBS News that say this could potentially survive. So let's look at what we mean by that. What's new this time around versus those initial one? Well, this order is narrower than the first. It targets specific categories rather than a blanket change. So let's put a note here on your screen. 1 restricts automatic citizenship for children born to people with foreign embassy ties, designated alien enemies, or people with parents who committed citizenship fraud. The second restricts what's commonly referred to as birth tourism. So folks who come here on vacation, they're studying abroad here in the States, they're pregnant. I mean, obviously the very famous example of this, it gets used as a wrong example of this, but people accuse Balogun of the U.S. men's national team of that being birth tourism without understanding the fact that she was literally not allowed to fly home, his mother. But this idea that people come to the country just to have children so that they can be born here in the United States and become American citizens, it is oftentimes something that is derogatory. You hear the term anchor baby being used a lot in what are these very highly charged conversations. It's a very complicated thing. And it's something that I think for a lot of people, there's an emotional aspect to this as well, too.
Yeah, and this was something that we heard Stephen Miller, advisor to the president, talk about during this announcement. Stephen Miller has oftentimes been one of the voices that we hear quite often, especially when it comes to the president's agenda on immigration. Take a listen to him as President Trump is announcing this executive order yesterday.
This has been something that people have talked about not only for years, but for decades. The idea that people come here pretending to be a tourist, pretending to be a visitor, saying they want to go to Disneyland, they want to go visit a monument or go to a national park, but the real reason they're here is to have a child, to make that child an automatic citizen, leave our country, and then have a U.S. citizen child. It gives them access under this broken system to welfare benefits, ultimately to the voting booth, and all the other rights and privileges that belong solely to Americans.
So I think it's important to mention here that the term birth tourism is a difficult thing to track and define. So we're going to do our best to try to give you a rough idea of what the data tells us about the frequency in which we see this. So the Migration Policy Institute this year, actually, they released a report that can give us, I think a rough estimate is the best way to do it. There's no official government estimate that exists because, of course, it's not only do you need to mention, do you have to count the children of foreign, people with visas, undocumented immigrants, et cetera. Intent is important here when we're talking about this because you mentioned the Fuller and Balogun situation. That was not an intention.
No.
It was not an intention. They were Nigerian. They were students.
They were
students from London that were doing an exchange program.
Yeah.
They were on that flight. They were not able to go because she was pregnant.
She was told to stay here.
Yeah, she was told to stay. So that's just to go to show that it is truly a case by case.
How do you prove? Yeah, how do you prove intent?
Now, especially when you're conducting a countrywide census on it. We see different cases take place here or there, but of course, when we're talking for the macro, it's very difficult. Nonetheless, they try to give us the best idea as possible. So they estimated that about 26,000 births per year may qualify as birth tourism. That's out of roughly 3.5 million total U.S. births nationally. Again, there is no official government estimate on this, but if you were to average that down to a 1 per number, that's roughly 1 birth tourism birth potentially for every 135 births here in the United States. So that's a less than 1% of all births in the United States that are potentially birth tourism. And again, that's potentially. This is may qualify. So there's still context that could potentially narrow that number down further. We don't know yet. They also note it's already considered visa fraud to travel to the U.S., specifically to obtain citizenship for a child. We have seen past administrations prosecute birth tourism schemes, including cases involving women who hid pregnancies while traveling to the U.S. There was actually a sentencing that took place last year. A California woman was sentenced to 3 years in prison for helping Chinese women travel to the United States to deliver babies. This was the culmination of a years-long investigation. I believe this was an initiative that started, I believe this is what the reporting says. I can check really quick. This was an Obama-era investigation that ended up seeing sentencing in 2025. So it goes to show you how long it took to prosecute that. So what you're hearing is from this, and I'm sure what the Migration Policy Institute would say is that does this necessarily add anything to what is pre-existing law? You do hear this oftentimes with some of the things that the Trump administration may try to crack down on. Voter fraud is another thing that critics of the voter ID laws, the Save America Act, they say you're trying to solve a problem that is already illegal. So that's what critics would likely say here in this case.
Yeah, because again, like you mentioned, the Migration Policy Institute already pointed out, the intent of coming here to have a child, to obtain citizenship for the child, is already fraud. It's already something that is not allowed to happen. The problem, of course, has been, and I think that case highlights, is the fact that it's really hard to prove, and it's very hard to obviously discover any type of intent. So how will this change any of that? Now, as for sort of the rationale behind the legality behind this, supporters argue that when you allow for this to happen, this birth tourism industry, as they claim to have, that it essentially is a magnet for immigration and illegal immigration. President Trump and his administration maintained the same legal interpretation of birthright citizenship as it did when that first executive order was signed, that birthright citizenship was solely a post-Civil War reparation. That it was something that was obviously put into place to try to, you had however many people who were previously enslaved, who now became free people, and whether or not what that question of citizenship was at that time, to try to define that question of citizenship. So we have a soundbite here. So who is this with here?
Stephen
This
Miller.
is sort of Stephen Miller yet again. This is the Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller. Let's hear from him on the legal rationale.
The 14th Amendment was passed exclusively in the aftermath of the Civil War so to ensure that the children of slaves would be citizens. It had no other meaning and purpose outside of that. And that's been clear, obviously, since the day that it was passed. You can go back and you can read the congressional debates. This is not something that's even seriously contested by anybody.
Well, we did. This was the same legal argument that we saw in the first.
I mean, it's been
birthright
contested.
citizenship
Yeah,
thing.
I think we should point out that it has been contested. This idea
very
that
much
it's this
has.
blanket policy that everyone understands it as this and such is obviously that even flies in the face of what the justices did just last month.
So we're going to read you. This is the final passage of the opinion of the court, the one that surmises the majority opinion here. So it writes, citizenship then and now was the right to have rights, to freely participate in our political community. The framers of the 14th Amendment extended that promise to every freeborn person in this land. I did the Control F to search slave in that opinion. It only appears twice in the majority opinion. So it's really very seldom is this really mentioned here when we're hearing, and I believe this is the Chief Justice John Roberts who wrote this portion here, when it comes to what the majority opinion is here. So that we talked about this in the days and the date of that Supreme Court ruling.
Yeah, we actually brought up some of those original quotes from those congressional debates. We from the 1800s. You use those as some of those as well too. And I'm not saying that I'm a legal scholar by any means, but I did not have the same interpretation that Stephen Miller did.
Yeah, and it is. There are interpretations and there are Supreme Court philosophies that go more into the intent. There's some that also go towards the text. And the text itself, whether or not, like, let's just...
I have the opening line of the 14th Amendment whenever you...
read it real quick.
All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside.
Yeah, so
They could have written it and said any any child of an freed slave. Like they could have been very specific. They very clearly chose to not... I'm trying to verbalize this without giving an opinion, but at least my interpretation is that things could have been much more specific, but they were not. And that's going to be the question for judges to have to answer. Again, it seems like.
And this is an argument that translates to many different Supreme Court rulings. The right to bear arms. You'll hear that argument where it's, well, the founding fathers didn't envision the weaponry that we have now. So, and we see sometimes, oftentimes when it comes to those things, the Supreme Court will say, well, yes, but this is what the text says. So for those who are wanting tighter gun control, they often find themselves frustrated with this concept. It's similar in this case. It is less about the intent as it is
the
with
language.
There was even I believe it's with the Solicitor General had that interaction with one of the Supreme Court justices where he was trying to hammer down this point, and he said something to the effect of, I'm paraphrasing here, it's a whole new world out here. And then the response, and I believe it was the Chief Justice John Roberts, he says, well, it's the same Constitution. So that was an argument that was contested by the Trump administration. It was not something that ended up proving successful in that case.
Because not to say that the Solicitor General did not make this point, but a huge part of their argument then, before the Supreme Court, was that this is a new world, that the 14th Amendment is outdated, and that no way the framers of the 14th Amendment could have envisioned a world in which you were a plain... I believe that's actually the quote. There's no way that they could have envisioned a world in which you are a plane ride away from becoming an American citizen, something to that effect. Then there was obviously the quote about the Constitution is the Constitution, even though this is a brand new world. So it is a valid thought there to think, well, sure, like the framers maybe did not envision this brand new world where you could get places so much more quickly. But international travel was still a thing, however slow it was. And, that's a much different argument than what Stephen Miller is presenting in the Oval Office, which is this was always just intended to try to answer the question of what do we do with the children of freed slaves. Those are two different arguments.
Or slaves themselves, because
Right,
they were born in the United States.
Right. So it's much. Those are two separate arguments of the world has changed, and this was always the original intent. So it's granted. It seems like they're gearing up for another.
And this Supreme Court has a track record of leaning closer to the originalism view of the Constitution,
considering
which
the
is,
sixth
which is
justice,
what does the text say itself. So that has helped the Trump administration. That has helped their agenda in some ways. This, of course, was not that way. So all that's to say is that this could likely be a case that winds up back in the Supreme Court. At the very least, this is one of the things that will actively refresh, because these are one of those executive orders that could be blocked in a federal court by an emergency injunction almost as soon as it's signed. So we don't see anything on it yet here. So
I will say, oh gosh darn it, and I already lost my train of thought. Sorry.
No, you're all good. We'll take you there. I got some stuff here.
The train just derailed.
The train derails sometimes. It's a Friday, but here we're chugging through here. But again, that's just to say that expect immediate legal challenges.
Yes.
This is going to be heading back to the courts. We have a statement here from the ACLU. This is Cody Wofsy. This is the deputy director of ACLU's Immigrants' Rights Project. He writes, quote, "The Supreme Court already decided this issue. Birthright citizenship is guaranteed by the Constitution. No additional executive order can change the meaning of the Constitution. Any executive order that tries to rewrite birthright citizenship will meet the same fate as the last one."
I remembered my train of thought. It wasn't part of Kavanaugh's, because remember Kavanaugh sort of rode the fence here with this decision, right?
He ruled against it, but he did it on the grounds of federal law, whereas the rest of the justices in the majority block did it on the basis of constitutionality. Correct.
Okay. I was curious to see if they were going to come back with an executive order versus having Congress try to handle this, because that is essentially what Kavanaugh was making the argument of, right? That this is something that Congress should handle.
I would be hard pressed to find the votes,
right,
on either side.
Which is probably the calculus that they did.
Yeah, okay. I think it would be very difficult to get at least in the Senate. This is not a line item bill, so you can't use the reconciliatory process and bypass that 60 vote threshold in the Senate and have to do that simple majority. So you would have to convince all your Republican bloc. You would have to convince perhaps a handful of Democratic senators if some of those fail.
The math to get 7.
The math is not there, and we would probably assume it would be a bit easier in the House, but that's not to say it would be easy in the House either.
Correct.
We just think about the Senate, because there is that 60 vote threshold is so critical for a vote like this. So if you're the Trump administration, you got to advance this agenda. Executive action is most likely the only way in which you'll be able to do it.
Yeah. I was just curious though if that is going to set their potential legal recourse back in any way, when the sort of ally that you had there on the Supreme Court who was saying, I don't believe it's constitutional. I believe it needs to be passed via federal law. Now you're coming back with yet another executive order when you're not listening to the justice, so to speak, I guess, maybe in a way. But I doubt that that's...
Well,
I'm just hypothizing.
Well, it's going to be interesting here, because you teased it earlier. There is, the question is, how are these going to fare in court? The ACLU is very bearish on what their chances are here in federal court. They think that this is going to essentially be a rerun of something that had already happened here in Trump 2.0. So we have CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson, who kind of gives us an idea of what could be in store.
I think these are ripe for a legal challenge. I think there are portions of the executive orders that, if they are read narrowly, might withstand review.
So yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see. So again, this is a narrower version. One of the questions that could be interesting here, and I'm not going to act like I know anything about this, but one part of it is you talk about those alien enemies.
Yeah.
That's defined to include any member of a designated foreign terrorist organization. That is something in which the executive branch has full the full ability to designate, undesignate. We've seen the State Department do it with a bunch of different organizations. So can that be used as an apparatus to further tighten the bounds in which you can restrict it? If it is a, MS-13, El Salvadorian gangs, whatever it may be, is that broaden them to take the children of a El Salvadorian immigrant and be able to perhaps restrict their citizenship? That's going to be one of the questions that I think they're going to have to ask, because that is something that we've seen the Trump administration and the State Department put on there. They have put cartel organizations as these foreign terrorist organizations. Is that going to be one of the questions? Is that allowed under this? So the machinations as to how this is being applied is much different than what we saw in the first one, because it is that broad one. So you and I obviously are not lawyers here, so we're not going to know what the actual legal thought process when this goes into a federal court we're going to see from these judges, but it's going to be interesting to see nonetheless, because as you heard there, this she believes that this is not this open and shut slam dunk case for the ACLU that perhaps they may be saying publicly now.
Exactly.
We've also heard some comments from Governor Newsom on this, right?
Yeah, well, so it was just the opening line of the 14th Amendment. I think that was sort of a way of saying, like, this has been decided, and this is it. Alex Padilla, also senator here in California, also responded, gave pretty staunch criticism, saying, this is a case that's already been decided, yet here we are again. All right, that's going to wrap up our conversation here on birthright citizenship being targeted yet again by the Trump administration.